All right, we will get started. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for this Advanced Teaching Roles webinar. I'm Leah Sutton. I work with Best NC, and we're a nonprofit that has been engaged in supporting advanced teaching roles for the last 7 or 8 years. And so one of the things that we do to support this program is to bring districts together to learn from one another and to talk about programs and how things are going and what challenges they're facing. So today's webinar is really focused on the upcoming grant opportunity that will be happening for districts this fall. So we're glad you're here. We hope that you will ask questions and engage with the other folks that are on the call so that we can all learn from one another. And I will give us a quick overview of the call, the next hour. So I'm going to quickly just give a very, very high level overview of what advanced teaching roles is in North Carolina. We have about 24 districts engaged in this program thus far. And so there's an annual opportunity for more districts to come on board. And so we hope that your district might be one of those new districts. Dr. Kim Evans from DPI will give us an overview of the actual RFP process and what districts are expected to do if they were going to apply for an ATR grant. And then we have two district leaders who have been doing this work, Seth Brown from Pitt County and Tina Lupton from Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, here to talk about why they're doing this work and to answer questions that you might have about the programmatic features, the proposals, and all of that stuff. So I will dive in and give you just a very high level overview of the program. So the basic premise behind advanced teaching roles is that most schools operate under this very flat organizational structure where everybody in the building, from instructional staff to classified staff, reports to the principal, and everybody's kind of equal, and it's a flat structure. This is dissimilar to how most organizations function, and it creates some challenges in our schools that I think for a long time we've just been accepting because this is just the way schools are operating. And now we're starting to really think differently about how we can structure schools so that it's better for educators and better for students. So the flat organizational structure, I think means that the only way for teachers to advance is really we have some, small leadership roles like classroom or like department chair and things like that, grade level chair, but really the only way for teachers to really meaningfully advance and make more money is to go into the principalship. And that's not always a good move for some of our teachers who really want to stay engaged in instruction. Because everything is flat and the principal is really, and the administrative team is really trying to support all the teachers all at once, our novice teachers, our developing teachers, which we have more and more of with the residency license pathway, they don't get a lot of embedded professional support. We know we have beginning teacher programs, and we know we're doing our very best to support those teachers, but they really need more day-to-day coaching than this structure allows them to receive. And then because we're putting kids in one classroom with one teacher, the quality of that teacher really impacts how much that child is going to learn in that 1 year. And when we know we have incoming teachers who are not as prepared as they used to be or as we'd like them to be, sometimes we have to make the hard decision of putting a teacher in a classroom that is, just not as high quality as we'd like. So these are challenges that are just things that schools face, but the structure of the school contributes to, these challenges impacting students negatively. So this is just a very basic illustration of what a first grade looks like without advanced teaching roles, where we just split the kids evenly across the teachers that we have in those roles. And a couple of kids are getting a really good year, a really good experience. And then we have some other teachers who are maybe not as good. And those children in those rooms are kind of maybe not getting the service and the quality of instruction we'd like them to have. So under an advanced teaching roles model, what we essentially do is pull our most effective teachers into leadership roles where they are leading a team of teachers, small team of teachers. So unlike an instructional coach position where they fly across the whole school, in ATR, the lead teachers are really highly focused on a small team, 6 to 8 at the very most. And they're focusing on, it could be around a grade level, it could be around a content area, and they're really focused on supporting those teachers on a day-to-day basis in the classroom. The lead teachers sometimes still have their own classrooms, so they spend half of their day leading their team and the other half of the day teaching. We have heard from some districts that the teachers really still want at least to have one classroom of their own to kind of stay in touch with instruction. And then we have some places where the lead teacher is fully released, meaning that they're spending all of their time coaching and pushing into classrooms and providing support and small group instruction and those kinds of things. So this solves the problems that I just mentioned. So one, we have now advancement opportunities teachers are making, having a teachers sort of have a position to strive for, a promotion, and they are earning more, up to $20,000 more for taking on a leadership role. So suddenly teachers have a real way to earn more money. Because the teachers are coaching that team on a day-to-day basis, the developing teachers, your beginning teachers, your novice teachers are getting professional support that helps them get better faster. Principals now actually have an instructional leadership team, so they don't have to be everything to everybody, and they can we can distribute leadership across the school in a way that is more impactful. And then because every classroom has a lead teacher that is overseeing it, every classroom now has at least some access to a really great, effective educator. So this is that first grade classroom where we actually took the most effective teacher, pulled her into a full-time lead teacher position, and kind of redistributed her students across the 4 classrooms that are now there instead of 5. So you will see that class size goes up slightly, but she's pushing into every single classroom. And so every single classroom is getting access to high quality instruction. So across the state, what I'll say is that different districts are doing this differently. One of the things that is incredibly important to these models is that as a district, you have autonomy to design your model and to, even at the school level, to design what works for that school building. But across the state, we see some types of roles kind of rising to the top that we're seeing. The most common roles are this lead teacher position I just mentioned, who coaches a small team and is really targeted. And then we also have some schools that are utilizing an extended reach teacher. This would be a teacher who takes on additional students. Maybe this is a teacher who's great with students, but not ready to lead adults. And so they're taking on additional students to extend their reach to those additional students and earn more money for that, but they're not necessarily leading other adults. And then we kind of see some variations on this. Sometimes an extended reach teacher will also help with PLCs and things like that. So the school has a lot of flexibility on how they're kind of structuring this. But these are the 2 most common roles that we're seeing right now. Here's a map that shows the districts that are currently participating in the program, and you'll see the colors are really just showing when people adopted the models. And so now, since 2020, there's been an annual opportunity to opt in for the program and to apply for a grant. And so you sort of see this kind of slowly expanding across the state. And then this is an example of just who is in, and this is about a year old, but how many teachers we're seeing in roles. And it's close to 1,000 teachers in North Carolina that are now in these leadership roles. So unlike the principalship, where there's only 1 or 2 positions at each school, we see advanced teaching roles being more like 15% of all teachers could be in a leadership role at scale if it's statewide. So there's more opportunity for teachers to get these promotions than going into the principalship as well. So at SNC, we're really devoted to this program. So we wrote a brief about this program last year that if you're interested in learning more about we interview districts and got their best practices, and we make recommendations for what the state needs to do. We talk about the history of the program. And so if you're interested in that resource, it's available on our website. We also have district or a lot of videos that have district testimonials on them. So I encourage you to check out our website if you're interested in learning more, and the link is there. We will send out, I should have said this at the outset, but we will send out our slides and the recording of this webinar after the fact, so you have it in case you need it or would like to share it with colleagues. So the annual RFP opportunity, Kim is going to talk about in just a second. It's available now. So the department released it early this year. So it is online and available now. And it's due October 15th.
It's actually due October 13th.
Oh, 13th. Thank you. October 13th.
It's on one of my slides too. So it's
perfect. Good. I'll edit mine. So it's due October 13th to Kim. The districts can receive up to 2 3-year grants. So each grant is a 3-year window, but you are eligible for 2 3-year grants. The grant funds for ATR are designed to support your transition to the program. So a lot of districts hire consultants and outside support to help them transition to the program and kind of figure out how to implement. Grant funds can be used to train the teachers who are going to be in these new roles, but they may not be used to fund the salaries. The salaries are funded within budget from the school-based budget, and a lot of districts use Title I funding for those salary supplements, and we can talk more about that. But the grant funds have to be used for transition costs, and you do get class size flexibility for your ATR schools during your grant term. So that's up to 6 years. Right now, we at S&C want that to be longer, but we want that to be in perpetuity as long as you're doing ATR basically. But you do get class size flexibility for your K-3 classrooms during the grant term. So right now that's up to 6 years. The link here has the RFP as well as previously approved proposals if you'd like to look at successful proposals from past years to get some inspiration. All right, Kim, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk more about the RFP. And if you have questions, just put them in the chat or hold on to them, and we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end.
Thank you, Leah. Good morning, everyone. I just want to briefly introduce myself. I'm Kim Evans, and I work in the Office of Educator Preparation and Licensure, and I work with the Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission, and I oversee all the operations around Pepsi. So you may have heard from me if you're within licensure with limited licenses or anything that has to do with licensure, or during the HR webinar, if you end up going to that with Tom Tomberlin. So to start out with, this program started out as a pilot in 2016, as Leah has brought up what years the program has been available. And then in 2020, it turned into a program through the General Assembly and their statute. And they provided the issuance of a request for an RFP for the program, and that happens on an annual basis. And Leah had already talked about that. Those proposals are due October 13th, and usually it's released September 15th. And those dates will come a little bit later, but to just give you a little bit of background around the program. And I'm not going to get too deep into this because Leah had already talked about what the purpose of the program is, but I'm going to take the opportunity, because I was a former instructional coach, just to say how beneficial this program is and how important it is to me personally, as having been a coach and not having that opportunity for increased compensation and being able to adequately be able to reach students and teachers across the board. Because as an instructional coach, I was placed in a school to provide support for all the teachers at once, and then also as many students as possible. I didn't have a classroom myself, but in order to do that, and one of my schools was over 900 students, and you can imagine it was about 35, 40 teachers to be able to support adequately, and then without extra compensation on top of that. And instructional coaches also get pulled to do other things like bus duty, lunch duty, morning duty, other things that aren't instructionally driven. And so this kind of program helps to really provide that kind of quality support while giving the teachers an opportunity to increase their compensation. So I applaud this program. And these are the key dates for the program. As I said, September 15th is when it's usually released by the state board, the RFP proposal opportunity. And then October 13th is when the deadline is for the proposals. And you'll see at the end, I'm going to let you know how you can submit your proposal. And then the selection would be December 15th. And that would be provided to the State Board of Education before it's announced. So I know one of the big questions is around funding. And for this particular cohort, you would be program cohort number 4, and the funding would start in 2024 to 2026. And that's what the RFP would cover. But then there's also an opportunity for 3 additional years of reoccurring funding that you could apply for. It doesn't match what you are awarded from the RFP, but it is some funding that you could definitely utilize to help continue your program.
And Kim, correct me if I'm wrong in saying this, but if the state budget were to have additional money, which we don't know about, there could be maybe some planning money or in early 2024. Yeah,
absolutely. Which has happened in the past. Leah knows that as well, as some of the other attendees here. There has been planning money that has provided opportunities prior to 2024 that you would be able to take advantage of. So I'm going to jump into the rubric that you would be able to use, that you would be using for this RFP. And you can see right here that it goes, that the actual rating system is from minimal to excellent. And so that's throughout all of the dimensions for that rubric. The first piece is the plan design, and we're going to go from the excellent side of the rubric, because I'm sure that's what everyone is going to hone in on and target as they design their RFP proposal. And so this part is talking about really making sure that your process is clear, that it's clear to whoever's reading it, that the implementation is clear, that you know what your timeline is going to be, and that you really know what your theory of action will be and how you supported that by research. And then we'll jump into the qualifications for positions, really identifying those 5 qualifications, and those are within the RFP directions. So you'll see on the DPI website that Leah had already shared earlier, that link, you can see what the qualifications are, and they're listed in there as far as what you would select for those qualifications. And then the weighting system for that criteria, also the theory of action to support that system, and then making sure that there's a balance between quantitative and the qualitative measures. And next, we'll talk about job responsibilities. So you would identify the 5 job responsibilities, and one of which is approved by the General Assembly. So that's also within the RFP directions, or it's letting you know what the statute is, so that you can look it up through the statute. for individuals serving in advanced teaching roles, making sure that you know the weighting system for the responsibilities and making sure it's being used properly. And also, again, the theory of action to support the system. And then that last piece, again, the quantitative and the qualitative measures. Next is the communication strategy. So this is all about building buy-in, right? To make sure that everybody's on board with what's happening with advanced teaching roles if you implemented this within your district. And so you need to make sure that all the stakeholders are part of this communication strategy, including parents, not just teachers, not just people within the school building, but those that are in the community, to really make sure that there's buy-in and understanding around what's going to happen with your ATR program in your district if you are to receive an award. Because you want it to be clear, and this is definitely an important piece. I mean, all of the pieces are important, but we really want to see, because we have to kind of be transparent about the selection process. We have different selected members from different stakeholder groups that help review these proposals, and then they give a score and feedback for each piece. And so this communication piece seems to be important because they really want to know what the buy-in piece is going to be. And then your budget plan, obviously, I mean, this is probably one of the most obvious pieces that you would include with your RFP. What about the salary supplements, since it's not part of the money that you would receive from the state? And what would you do with the program funds? And then how many schools and the number of personnel that you would include in your program? And then how the funds are used by central office personnel to provide that support that would be needed throughout your program. Another piece that is highly looked upon is the sustainability piece, because the state wants to know, and the state board wants to know how your plan is going to be sustainable beyond the funding that you get from the state. What are you going to be able to do to ensure that your plan, your program is sustainable beyond that, and even how you would grow your program? So that's a very important piece to make sure that you take into consideration as you put together your RFP proposal. And then I think this is the last piece, the outcomes and evaluation. So for the first bullet, I just want to make sure that I point out that articulates proposed outcomes in specific terms. Just make sure that these are attainable. Don't be over aggressive with them. Make sure that they're realistic. And also the reviewers will also take into consideration if they think that that would be attainable within a year, or the 3-year period if you're doing it. However you're making your outcomes and your evaluation happen, just make sure that this first bullet is attainable. And then making sure that the current performance metrics of the LEA or the school district, that the goals, that they're based on prior performance. And then you can see in the last 2 bullets how the school district would then respond to the outcomes with respect to the program implementation. So then what would you do with the evaluation and the outcomes to then make your program better? And then this last piece, equity and diversity, this was provided as an edit or an amendment by the state board last September. And so you'll get to see throughout the the booklet, the RFP booklet, that there has been some additions around equity and diversity. And you'll see on the next slide examples of those. However, they are not underlined anymore, but you'll see how it's making sure that all students or every student is being touched, that teachers of various cultural and social backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, early career teachers, that all of that is being considered within the RFP pieces. And then a few additions that we made for this year, you can see on page 9. So one piece that the LEA will have to take into consideration is how they're going to work with an independent research organization. So at this time, I believe it's the Friday Institute that helps to review and discuss data around the ATR programs, and making sure that you make this part of your RFP proposal as to how you would work with them and make sure that they grab the data that they needed, or are able to gather the data that they needed, because this is a requirement for an evaluation report that goes to the General Assembly. And then the last piece you can see towards the bottom in red is to just send me one electric copy by email to me. And so you can send that first to go ahead and make the deadline. But then also you need to send one original sign in blue ink. It says blue ink. Anyways, to me, you can also send that. You can see the address right there. So the electronic copy you can send first, and then the original copy you can send snail mail or US mail to me directly afterwards. But I know that it can be kind of time pressed in order to make that October 13th date. So please go ahead and send that electronic copy.
Awesome. Thanks, Kim. Appreciate that overview and insights. And I really liked hearing your personal experiences as an instructional coach too. So I had not heard that story before. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Great. So we're going to just open up the conversation. We've already gotten a couple of good questions in the chat, but we're just going to open up the conversation to your questions. So it could be questions for Kim specifically about the rubric. It could be questions for Seth or Tina about the program generally and how they're making it work. So I will kick it off with just a couple of questions, a question for Seth and a question for Tina, and then we'll just open it up. But you can send your questions in by chat if that's what's most comfortable, or if you want to just come off mute and ask a question, you're welcome to do that too. Please don't be shy. And this next chunk of time is really just for you to ask anything that's burning. And it really can be like very basic. Why would I do this? It can be basic or very technical, whatever works for you all. So Seth, Pitt County has been doing this work for quite some time. I think I have since 2013. Is that about right?
Yes, 13, 14. Yep. Yes.
Yeah. So a long time, decade of doing this work. And you were one of the very first ATR grantees in that very first cohort in 2016. So looking at a decade of doing this, how is this impacting your district, your educators, your students, and why have you stuck with it?
I think the story for me comes from our superintendent. When we first started this, Ethan Linkers, he started asking the question, so how long is this thing going to take? That was the first year. About the second year, midway through the second year, he was like, all right, how are we going to sustain these things? So the idea, I think, for me is that one of the reasons that we were able to sustain it is, number one, we had a leader who was part of the process, woven into the process, and then also one who saw the impact. I think one of the things we did is we started slow to go fast. The reason we say 13, 14 is that's when we started our leadership programs. We had this mantra, we were not going to wait on Raleigh. Let's start it whether we get the grant or not. Because at first the General Assembly put out a RFP, and then didn't fund anything and then did it again. And so we're like, we just got to start. And so we started a beginning teacher leadership program and a teacher leadership institute so we could start onboarding and creating a pipeline of teacher leaders. Something we learned early on with Charlotte Mecklenburg, they did the same thing, because you can't have a magic wand and say, boom, you're a teacher leader, boom, you're a teacher leader. You got to bring them up. So we did that, I think, was one of the keys. I think the other thing we were able to do is build capacity for trainers in our own district. So the trainings that we offer are oftentimes very expensive. To train 40 teachers in cognitive coaching with an outside consultant plus fees, it can cost $27,000 a cohort. Whereas if you certify your own people, that cost can be reduced to $2,000. So that was one of the key things. So in sustainment, it's easy for us to sustain this world-class Fortune 50 company training because our people are trainers. We also have an evaluator. So part of convincing Dr. Linker that it worked is we had an outside person to actually do the evaluation. And when Tripp Stallings was with Friday Institute, I think our evaluation budget was 3 times what his was for the whole state. And our evaluation budget was for just Pitt. And that's partly because we had a grant, that first federal grant. And it was a really good thing because we had a thought partner. We had someone who could help us formatively collect data. We made changes and then also showed what worked. And so I'll put in the chat where you guys can find those publications that our evaluators have provided us. I think that was a key thing. The other thing we decided is we had to figure out what to do, and anything that was good, we had to stop. Because when it comes to sustainment, you can only sustain the great. So we had to eliminate the good to only do the great. And that was a good learning environment, using a grant, trying things, seeing what schools work, what are the best candidates, how do we do that? And so that was a mindset that really helped us big time. The other thing is widespread use is key. That was one of the things we learned by working with the federal government and their departments is widespread use. If this thing becomes so widespread that it's a way of doing business, then principals won't stop it. They want to keep asking. So right now, for example, we have a position called a multi-classroom teacher. We fund 14 positions at 12 schools, and I have 7 schools that say, hey, I want one. Hey, I want one. Which shows there's demand rather than, I don't know if this thing works. So that idea of widespread use was key. And then the other thing I think for us that was different, and this is what's neat, I think about Pitt, is we started working with opportunity culture early on, respect their work, use their work, especially for that multi-classroom teacher role. And we had to create different roles for our teachers in Pitt. We've got some really smaller schools, more rural, and what worked for us was creating our own. So we have 5 different positions. And I think of those 900 positions across the state, 420 are in Pitt. So we've been able to do this big time over the years. And I think that was key, is having opportunities for smaller schools, having the multi-classroom teacher, which is more intense and expensive, but it works very well. And having other positions allow teacher leaders to progress up this career pathway rather than just aim for the top for the MCT, MCL position there. So that's what I would say as far as some of the things why it's worked for us so well. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Seth. So Tina, I'll turn to you. You guys were awarded a grant in 2020. So have been in this work for a little while, several years, but not quite as long as Pitt County. Talk about what drew you all to this district or to this initiative, and what your goals are and just how it's going for you.
Thanks, Leah. So what drew us to this program is we started to see larger gaps in our teacher preparedness and our outcomes for students. So we wanted a way to even the reach that our teachers had and even out the access that our students had to great teachers. So we needed to find a way to be able to spread great teachers throughout larger parts of our district, especially in schools that tend to have had higher turnover. So we used opportunity culture or advanced teaching roles as a ways to increase the reach of those great teachers by putting them in the populations that needed it the most. Because we believe that all of our students deserve great access to great teachers. And in order to do that, we needed to bring some of our great teachers out of the classroom to be those lead teachers and to be our multi-classroom leaders that are now providing essentially professional development every day to teachers, because they're in the classrooms with our teachers and they're co-teaching and they're leading and coaching the strong pedagogy that they had and implementing that in more classrooms. So we have seen great things from doing this work over the last 3 years. Several schools are already off the low performing list from implementing this work. We have schools that no longer have teachers that have negative effectiveness. Several of our schools, every teacher is a blue or a green teacher now, and they weren't 3 years ago, because of having that job embedded coaching on a daily basis, and someone that's in there with you and helping you along the way has really shown great growth in many of our schools. And we've seen again that variation of teacher preparedness. We have many folks that teaching is a second career for them, and they didn't have the opportunity to go through strong 4-year colleges of educator preparation like many of us have had before. So they needed a way to get strong pedagogy quickly, and multi-classroom leaders were a way that helped us to instill those strong pedagogical practices in our teachers. We're also able to keep teachers and retain teachers at a higher rate in those schools because they have the support that they need to work through the struggles that come with being a teacher. So we've seen great things in the 3 years that we've been running this program.
Awesome. Thanks, Tina. So I want to get to the question about funding. And we see, I will say that, Tina, you're kind of getting at it, but across the state, we see that the vast majority of schools that are implementing at ATR are Title I schools. And so that is, I think, 2 factors related to that. One is that, to Tina's point, we want to target the schools that really need great teachers the most, or maybe have had high turnover, just a lack of effective teachers really staying in the building over a long period of time. So districts have really targeted Title I schools because they just need the support. And then secondly is related to the fact that Title I funding is often used for salary supplements for these positions. So if you both want to talk a little bit about what do you use the grant money for versus how are you funding from the school-based budget to make this all work? I think that's a big thing to kind of figure out and unlock for districts to make it possible.
I'll start old school and go back. I think part of it for me is, and I alluded to it in my answer, is it's really the difference in startup costs versus non-reoccurring. And that was one of the big ahas, is you can't use one-time funds for reoccurring costs, especially when it comes to human beings. And that's one of the things that, to be upfront with you, that opportunity culture has done well, is how do you switch jobs around? How do you find that in reoccurring cost? We've been playing with those models and had different funding sources. So we've had those conversations twice and getting ready to have another about how we do that. I think the other thing, though, is the startup cost is really about how do you onboard your people? How do you train them? How do you support them? Because there's some things that, again, and it's sort of I was being sarcastic a little bit, but that waving the magic wand and saying you're a teacher leader, Pitt County made that mistake during Race to the Top. We had a different program, and that didn't work at all, because you can't put a single teacher at a difficult school with high poverty, low achievement, and then expect them to magically fix everything. And so I think that's the thing, that district support, the district training, and really certifying your people, because that's the other thing we've been working with districts around us, is what happens after that initial grant goes away. How do you keep funding the new teachers so they still get the high quality training they need in order to do the job, to move from an expert with students to now an expert with adults, which is a big shift, a huge identity shift, I would say. So that's where the funds are used.
We had similar experiences in Winston-Salem. The initial funding that we had from the advanced teaching roles grant was that implementation costs and, you know, planning out that sustainability. None of the funding went towards people at any capacity. It was always around partnership. We utilized public impact, and they really helped us along the way with the onboarding and the implementation part of the advanced teaching roles. They helped us with identifying strong schools to start with. They helped us with identifying our parameters for, you know, what do we want out of a multi-classroom leader? What do we want out of an expanded impact teacher? We also included Reach Associates, which are advanced instructional assistants. And then we now play on those roles as part of our teacher pipeline in growing internally our folks. But when we were implementing, we were looking at, you know, our communication plans, our professional development plans, the onboarding, because all of this takes significant time to do and to be thought out well in advance. This is not something that you can do in a month and plan. It takes about a year runway of which schools are you going to implement, starting those conversations with those principals and leaders at the school levels. So that way they have a long runway to be well planned. So then that way the following year they can actually implement it starting when before the kids walk in the door. So our funding was primarily utilized on professional development. Then schools will utilize their Title I funds, or they might adjust their local allotment, because some folks have instructional facilitators. Once they get to 100% reach for advanced teaching roles, they'll adjust out that instructional facilitator, which is a locally funded position, and replace that with a multi-classroom leader position, and then utilize Title I funds off the top to pay for the additional stipends. Primarily, our schools are using those Title I funds. We have some schools that had some leftover funds of some other state funds. I'm trying to think of what they were called now. Oh, it's not going to come to me. I'm so sorry. But utilizing different pots of money that we've had specifically for schools to turn around, essentially, and to come off those low performing lists.
Was it Restart funds, Tina?
It wasn't Restart, but it was the other ones that were associated with that accountability model that we had.
Because I'm just listening, thinking what we are looking at is Restart, Low Wealth, Title I. The trick we found out almost the hard way is making sure that you don't fund positions that then will bite you with Title I with supplant. So if it's federal funded and federal funds, and keep it that way. So be very, you got to be very proactive with how you plan it. And that's some questions that we were looking at as far as, nope, it would be easy to fund it that way, but then we can no longer use Title I funds for these schools if we use this fund for this school. And so that's a difficulty that I wish wasn't there, but we had to think through.
I think, Seth, it speaks to, and Tina, you kind of pointed at this, like the planning process as districts are planning their proposals, even for the grant to begin, a variety of people need to be at the table for that planning conversation. So your federal programs person, your finance person, your HR person, and your curriculum instruction person, people all need to kind of be at the table as you're planning your proposal, to make sure you're just considering all the things that your district wants to prioritize in the plan.
I just also wanted to add, because Seth and Tina both have talked about opportunity culture. So last time the selection process, there were multiple proposals that use public impact as their base. And I just want to stress the importance of being able to show how you're customizing that for your district, because the district that was then chosen, from the feedback that we got from reviewers, because I'm not a reviewer, that district was able to then show how they customize that, because otherwise it seems very flat across the board as far as using that particular program or that structure.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure that you are showing how you're customizing that for your district. Just one tip.
And that's, yeah. I think the other thing too, Leah, based on what you were saying of the different people, one of the things we did, and we developed it for the grant proposal, it was like, let's have a leadership team. So we have a grant leadership team that started out, and that was key because it had our top 3 leaders in the district, superintendent, 2 associates, and then it had our finance director. It had 2 principal reps, 2 teacher reps. And that was important because, and our grant evaluator. So then every other month we met, and that cadence every other month, they could handle the big decisions. We could look ahead, be proactive. And then it was easy for us to feed up the chain. Here's the great data we're seeing. Here's the challenges we need. Here's what we need to do in every school. And that was one of the key things, I think, to sustainment, that we didn't all of a sudden have to say, hey, we've been doing this for 5 years. Let's continue it. It was middle of year 2. He's like, how do we continue these things? Because this is working really well. So that was neat.
Great. So I'm gonna give our guests a chance. If anybody wants to come off mute or has a question they want to put in the chat, please do so. I have other questions that have kind of come up in my head while everybody's been talking, but feel free to jump in. In my wait time.
So extended impact, Casey, I think, Tina, you guys use those positions, don't you?
Yeah, we utilize extended impact teachers in different ways. Each school kind of customizes how they utilize their extended impact teacher. We have one school that has an extended impact teacher for science, but they actually utilize that position for the whole school. That's kind of like almost like a specials that they've incorporated them as a rotation. So that way this really high performing science teacher gets to touch all of the kids in the school with his science knowledge, while also working with and supporting teachers in their science content. We have some that use kind of similarly like a lab approach, where this teacher is someone that's really has performed well in mathematics. So they utilize them during part of their when they do interventions. This teacher will come and provide math interventions for populations of students that need that support. Others use it in a more traditional sense, where this expanded impact teacher kind of takes on just more students within their classroom. And then we use that reach associate position, that high performing instructional assistant comes in and helps to still pull small groups, and also will help with classroom management and things of that capacity, and kind of be like a co-teacher or co-facilitator in the classroom.
I think I mentioned this earlier, but what is to us really exciting about this is that each principal really takes the lead in consultation with the district person who's kind of overseeing HER on how can we utilize these roles. And it gives the principal an opportunity maybe that they don't have in a traditional setting to say, okay, I'm looking at the talent in my building, and I'm looking at the needs of the children in my building, and I'm really trying to create a model that best leverages that talent to meet those needs. And, you know, I just think with our traditional, like, got to fill this position and put a body in this classroom, we haven't had an opportunity to always think about it in that way. And so you really can leverage your talent better. And then I think that helps morale in the building. So another question here from Teresa. Do you have examples of studies of LEAs that are successful and use some model other than opportunity culture? or an example of how an LEA really customizes OC for their school district. So I think, Seth, you could talk about your evaluation of your program as an alternative to OC.
So that's one of the neat things. So I put up there, it's the Pitt County Schools website and then /publications. And it's in the chat, provide you with our evaluation reports, which is where I would start. We actually got another grant recently to look at how do we really focus on the leaders to support teacher leaders? What's the second phase of this? So the first phase with the multi-classroom teacher, facilitating teacher, collaborating teacher, that data is captured real well in the 5th year evaluation. So those are all sustainable outside of any grant funds. The new one we're looking at is also then how do we focus on the teachers, which is Leah was alluding to. Having principal buy-in was key. Just saying, here's an ATR, here's an ATR, they don't know how to use them. I think making sure that how do we support, the other key was how do we make sure that we support the principals to take care of your best teachers, because some of them thought they're my best teachers. I don't have to mess with them. Let me worry about the ones who are lower performing. Like, no, if you focus on your leaders, they build leaders, and that's actually a more effective way to organize a school. So that took some hard lessons as well. So that I would definitely point you to some of those evaluation reports to look at some success, and the case studies in there. Evaluator really helped us paint a good picture there, I think.
Chris, I'll say statewide, of the districts that are doing non-OC models, Pitt is really the only one that I'm aware of that's invested in an evaluation in that way. So they are the go-to. You have the right we have the right person on the call for that question. So also, so a couple of things as we kind of get close to our 11 o'clock end time. One thing we've hit on a little bit of this equity idea that has to be in the proposal, that most districts are starting with their neediest schools, which of course is sort of an equity focus. Another thing that some districts are doing that I'll just promote is that some districts are doing tiered supplements. So the supplement is higher. And I don't know, Tina, are you guys doing that? The supplement is higher if you're going to work and lead in a higher poverty school or a higher need school. So that's something to think about as you're thinking about how you might incorporate equity in the proposal. Another thing that that's in the proposal that I wanted to hear you guys talk a little bit about is, what qualifications are you really looking at for teachers to be eligible for these roles? How have you gone about thinking about that?
So for Winston, we have different criteria for each of the roles. We look at principal recommendation. We look at their experiences, their previous roles that they've had. If they have a variety of experiences, you'd want someone, for example, if they're going to be an elementary multi-classroom leader, it's good that they've had experience in different grade bands. We also look for having at least 4 years of experience as a teacher, having 3 years of strong performance data for outcomes, whether that be EVAS or other assessments that are out there. We don't limit to just EVAS because not all great teachers have EVAS or are in positions that are ranked that way. We also look at their NESIS information, looking at their years of evaluations, whether or not they're proficient or accomplished across the various teaching profession standards. And then we also look at their professional development. What have they participated in? What have they led themselves? We utilize behavioral inventory questions when we do our interviews to look at how they would respond to certain scenarios and whether or not they kind of have that adult leader quality. For our expanded impact teachers, we're looking at how they have performed with students. Again, their NESIS, their evaluations, looking at their EVAS if they have it, or other indicators of growth and performance with student outcomes. And then we also, again, look at their professional development. How are they continuing to grow as a teacher and as a leader?
In the chat, I put the qualification criteria we have for multi-classroom and facilitating teachers, which are the two positions we've done the most. And it's basically, we've identified 6 different categories, very similar to what Tina mentioned. And so to answer the question that just popped up as far as EVAS, for us, a multi-classroom teacher is the highest position. So that one is, we say blue and EVAS, so above 2 on EVAS, or 25% in the state, because if the state pays them a bonus, that recognizes that they are, that recognizes their student achievement. I think the other thing to highlight for us is we looked at what are we already paying for, so as far as people are okay with teachers getting extra money. So we started with national boards and masters were 2 of the things that got the most points, because people are used to getting, back in the day, 10% for national or masters, 12% for national boards. And then we developed our own program to certify that was pretty intense as well. And so we looked at that as well. And I can explain some of that if need be, but we have the categories and there's certain points you can get across the board. And student achievement is a required category for the positions.
Right.
So Tina, how do you figure out 1.5? Because that was a hard one for us. We looked at 1.5, you know, you got green, you got above 0 is growth. So we said above 0 is positive growth. That made you at least, but how do you guys do that one?
So we always have a lot of conversation around this because it's not EVAS alone. Sometimes it is positive green because they have other factors that show that they have made positive changes in their classrooms and impacts on other teachers. The 1.5 is what we've seen kind of looking at the current MCLs that we have and the growth that they're able to make with the teachers that they have. We've seen a little bit of a correlation between the stronger the EVAS, the more outcomes they have had when they're coaching.
That's the EVAS data for our MCTs is the most limiting criteria we have, because we're at 2.0 or top 25. Top 25 expands it dramatically, especially for 3A reading. It opens the pool drastically, but that's one that we've been hard on and found some results, and it's been limiting on who makes the pool. Yeah,
it does.
All
Yes.
right, well, Seth, Tina, Kim, thank you guys so much for being with us and sharing your insights today. We are at 11 o'clock, so I'll quickly wrap up for us. The proposals are due on October 13th. This date is wrong. I'll fix it before I send the deck out. And then if you're interested, get that to Kim by October 13th. And then you'll know if you're awarded by December 15th of this year. We are having another session. So the RFP came out early this year, which is great, to give you a little more time to kind of consider it and prepare for it. So we're having another session that's really going to be a very open-ended Q&A session. We'll have some districts participate, and then we'll also have Tom Tomberlin from DPI participate. It's on August 16th. You've been receiving my invitations, but if you want to register, you can scan this QR code, and I'll send out more information on that event shortly. And that is all we have. So I hope this has been helpful and meaningful for you. You're always welcome to reach out to me with questions. And if I, don't know, I'll be happy to connect you with someone in the district who I think is an expert in this work. So thank y'all for being here, for your interest in this work. And please feel free to reach out if we can be helpful.